Good afternoon to all. I welcome you once again for the EMEA webinar, which is organized in collaboration with Positive Agenda Advisory on how to finance the green transition to tackle climate change in the Mediterranean and Africa. So we decided to have this webinar in the margins also of the meetings at the COP26, and also because of the recent report which was presented by a specific working group on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is known as the IPCC report, which was actually published in August 2021. This report was really very interesting, and I really encourage you to read it because it provided very fresh and new evidence on global warming and the urgency to reduce the CO2 emissions in the coming decades globally, and particularly in the Mediterranean and Africa. This is a very, very important report. Now, failure to engage in a meaningful change in the next decades will make many regions of the planet inhabitable for humans and other species. So we have a serious responsibility to push the action toward really a meaningful change to tackle climate change issues. We might still have a window of opportunity, and there might be still time to avoid the highest temperatures increase and disaster scenarios. But this will depend on several factors, such as, for example, the political will, the effectiveness of emission mitigation measures, and access to sufficient funding to accelerate the implementation of meaningful actions. Now, it's very important as well to consider that the financial community needs to put their act together and also move and accelerate this transition toward greener economies. Now, the Mediterranean region and the African continent are unfortunately, among the most affected areas of the world. There will be more affected by rising surface temperatures and sea level rise as well, vulnerability to droughts and water scarcity. These are to name a few, and of course this will lead to loss of biodiversity, the shrinking of habitable areas, and then obviously the African continent is a continent that is growing in terms of population. So this will put further pressures on the countries and the cities themselves, and obviously on a very important sector, which is the agriculture and forestry. And we've seen that in the forest, they have been really suffering over the years because of the droughts and because of the fires and all of this. So we must really think of the future, not from today, but really from many years ago, from yesterday. And unfortunately, there is no sufficient global political willingness to drive the transformational scenario toward serious sustainability in terms of the economies and the societies that we are in. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic is creating further pressures, and eventually we need to think of that challenge, those challenges as well. Now, in Africa, as I mentioned, more pressure on urban growth, urbanization processes, and these need to be thought very carefully. It must be really accompanied by targets, sustainability criteria, resilience strategies, sustainable infrastructure and targeted financing mechanisms to guide the developments of the cities and also of rural areas and other municipalities and towns that is really must be adapted to the climate change, and also deal with the negative impact of the environment. There are many works that have been already undergoing, like, for example, a lot of progresses have been made in terms of putting in place energy efficiency mechanisms, new use of renewables, for example, land use management, so really to manage very carefully the land, and also in terms of the provisions for infrastructures that are also based on more natural solutions, that are really being developed. For example, in Europe, Europe has been very much in advance in these aspects, but now we need to really think globally and try also to develop this type of mechanisms in the Mediterranean and Africa. Also, I'm very happy, as I mentioned, because we have the collaboration with Positive Agenda, and they have recently co-authored a very important report, which is post-COVID-19 recovery in Africa, recommendation for policy for policy actions and actors. And mainly the main investment priorities in the coming decades that would be very much aimed at linking clean energy with post-COVID-19 recovery efforts. This is also the link, as I mentioned before, climate smart agriculture, green transportation, quality data to drive the digital economy and social protection, tackling inequality, green industrial policy, environmental taxes, and other mechanisms like or strategies into specifically sustainable tourism. So I really invite you to read this report because it gives really clear targeted recommendations for the green transition, how to enhance the investment and financing in the African continent. So clearly there are a lot being done, and we, for example, at EMEA, myself, we have contributed to the G20, T20 debates, which we proposed practically a new recovery sustainable fund, which could be guaranteed by international organizations to fund a sustainable recovery for Africa. This is, of course, a proposal which needs to be moved forward. This means that in the next 30 years, we need to have very strong private-public partnership in financing mechanisms to reduce, in reality, the cost of funding for the countries that would like to really move into their sustainable green transition as fast as possible. But again, you need to have a collaboration of the private sector and of the private sector private sector and public sector together in a collaborative solidarity mode to be able to advance the sustainable transition that is really badly needed for us and for the future generation. So with all these elements, which will guide our discussion today, I'm very glad to have this webinar again in collaboration with our partner, Positive Agenda Advisory, which aims practically at discussing the economic, investment, and financing strategies and mechanisms needed to a meaningful, sustainable transition in Africa and in the Mediterranean, considering that these, this continent and this region are really very much threatened by climate change and also the post-COVID economy, implication consequences. So this is important also to keep in mind. I'm also very happy because this webinar is quite timely. Currently, there is the COP26 and they are in Glasgow, and hopefully they will produce some meaningful actions and strategies for the years to come to accelerate the green and sustainable transition. I'm very honored to welcome our panelists today. So just a few points before we start. This webinar content and discussions are public and they are live streamed on Facebook, so you are aware. Also, the EMEA team later on will publish the recording and the webinar and also a report that summarizes the main recommendations and the main discussion points. Now, for the participants, please write your questions and comments on the Q&A box, and you have it on the chat box that you can do. And also, we will collect, if any, a few comments and questions from the Facebook. So let us start. I would like to start straight away with my colleague, Cynthia Echave, to summarize the main conclusions briefly of the IPCC report for the Mediterranean and Africa to start the discussion with all of you. Cynthia is a project coordinator and senior researcher at the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association. She's an architect and an urban planner specialized in urban ecology. So she really has worked a lot on the cities and how to make cities more sustainable. And she worked on a very interesting projects in Barcelona city to make it more green and more sustainable. So it's very interesting. And also she is coordinating the Interreg project on enhancing the use of renewables and energy efficiency in public sector domain. And we are trying to develop these strategies into the Mediterranean and Africa as well to enhance and accelerate the transition. So, Cynthia, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Rim. I'm very pleased to begin this wonderful webinar on the panelists. So, as Rim was saying, we prepared this first introduction just to open the debate later on with our invited panelists. So first of all, just to give a glance what the sixth assessment report of the IPCC will be. So this is like the first of the series of reports that they will be presenting and launching till 2022. So last August, last summer, they present this from the working group #1, the physical science basis. So basically, it's a report prepared by 234 authors from 66 countries and more than 500 contributors. So basically, the report is structured in four main parts, and basically what they are focusing, I will give a short description. So regarding the current state of the climate, there is evidence, and they state that the impact of human activities on the global warming, it is that way, and that since 2,000 years ago, there has been a progressive global warming, having in the last 100 years, the most important repercussion, increasing of one degree in the last 100 years. So there is also an improve on the data collection and the observational data. So that's important regarding the research approach of the report. In the second part about the possible climate futures, basically what they are also stating is that for sure the global temperature will probably exceed the 1.5 degrees. And if this is coming up, the consequences arriving just to a 2 degrees global warming will be a more frequent extreme heat events, and of course an important impact on agriculture and health. Regarding the third part about the limiting future climate change, I will highlight about even that we achieve all these ambitious carbon neutrality objectives and targets, and if we achieve to this improvement on air quality, although there will take around 20 to 30 years for stabilize the temperature. So this is important because of course the time is getting late. Then the fourth part probably is the one that it brings more the added value from this report regarding the interiors, because it's the first time that the climate information itself and the risk assessment is addressed into regional adaptation. So they have wonderful fact sheets for the different regions around the world. So basically they focus on how it's going to be intensify the hydrological cycle, affecting precipitation in some latitudes increasing, and in some other decreasing the rainfall. Then what is going to happen with the sea level rise, heat waves and flooding affecting cities and coastal areas mainly. Also regarding the pole north and the south pole, melting of permafrost in the glaciers, and all the consequences that we all know regarding the spread of viruses already frozen there. And then of course the ocean warming and acidification having a strong impact on marine heat waves and loss of biodiversity. So of course, now focusing on our area of interest, that it's Mediterranean and Africa, one of the most relevant facts that they are highlighting is that Africa will probably reach an increase between 3 and 6 degrees over the end of the century. So they will affect the global land average, and Africa is going to be the area having a faster increasing of temperatures. So this, of course, will have, as we were saying, a direct impact on marine heat waves, water scarcity, food security, extreme ecosystem fragility, and of course, an impact on governance. So if we took part of these four main aspects about the water scarcity, food security, ecosystems, and resilient capacity as part of the main vulnerable aspects, the report highlights, for example, for the water scarcity, of course, there will be a direct affection into health and sanitary systems. Although there are improvement on the access of safe drinking water, between 1990 and 2008, there was an increasing of 56 to 65% of the population increase the access to drinkable water, although there's not the same improvement on the sanitation facilities. So that means that there is also a strong link with the health conditions of the urban or rural environments. Then the difficulties also highlighted in the detection of the impacts. Monitoring, it's an extremely important aspect, not only in this case for the water concern on the surface and the groundwater quality. As you know, the way that we ensure the cycle of the water means to also aware about the quality of the groundwater that we can have. And of course, increasing of water shortage. This also highlighted, the report highlighted that there is still a poor understanding in the region on how climate change will affect on the water quality. Regarding this food security, also it's a very extreme, important risk that the region has, because not only about the relation to the productivity of the sector, but also for the food availability, the access, and the undernutrition that can have to the population. Of course, the increase of the rise of temperature, the increase of flooding affects on the fertility of the land, of the crops. So this decreases the availability of food, but also the food access in terms of the production and the prices of the food. So this will be an important element to tackle, especially for the more poor people and low income in Africa. And of course, the undernutrition in terms, there is still a situation of potential lifelong impact on health and vulnerability related to different diseases. In terms of ecosystems, as we all know, there is a gap on monitoring ecosystems. Any type of the systems, even in coastal lakes, mountains, and the impacts in long term that this ecosystem will have with the affection of the climate change and the rise of temperatures. There's also the report highlights the successful stories at the same time that the region has been done precisely on integrating trees on the cropping systems. There are some examples that they cited, for example, Zambia and Malawi, that they began to integrate these practices. But still, we have a severe impact on wildlife, on the other hand, and the degradation of marine protected areas like coral reefs. So this is also related to the next point about how the region is preparing and building the resilient capacity. And this is mainly how to mainstream climate risk into the planning and policy. As you know, urban population in Africa is projected to triple by 2050. So this is a mainly impact that the region will have. And mainly the evolving cities are unplanned. So there's a strong necessity to strengthen the implementation of the strategies at the local level. Of course, the report also highlights the advancing efforts that at the national or regional level has been climate change plans, and even they cited 10 countries that are developing new climate change laws. That's a very positive thing. But at the same time, there's a lack of going into the ground. So how these these upper plans get into the ground and apply. But the other side, the report also highlights the successful stories behind a local level adaptation practices. So that means the community scale, it has a lot of potential, not only because it involves directly with the end users, farmers, or people involved directly in the communities, and it's like a hoping scheme to the report invite to continue supporting. And then, of course, there is there will be a lack or a necessity of integrating more these plans into the planning and design properly the infrastructures and services to tackle the flooding, heat waves, and resources provision. So to finalize, the report concludes as a main key risk in Africa these 4 points. First of all, the emerging issues like human security, conflicts, the violent conflict in the region, and migration. This is probably more the socio-economic emerging issue that it is highlighted. On the other side, a properly integrated adaptation and mitigation approaches. This is very related as what I was mentioning about planning and integrating in a multi-level approach. Then about the biofuels and land use, this is in very important aspect because can be also a point that can put in risk the food security. I mean, dedicating agricultural or biofuels not for feeding people but for feeding fuel, it's not the best option. And then finally, the climate finance and management, that it is precisely the topic of that this webinar wants to highlight. Just to mention a couple of studies that they cited about the estimation of the adaptation cost in Africa, and there's 2 studies. One of these Terry from 2009, and it was estimated between 20 to 30 billion dollars per year to the cost of the necessity of the actions in the adaptation. And to tackle sea level rise scenarios also, there are around $794 million. So just to conclude, of course, it's a region, a complex region that by one side has a beautiful potential in the biodiversity that they achieve, that they have, but at the same time has the hazard and the challenge to deal the growth and the increasing development of their cities and villages related to these natural assets and the productivity of the region. So I will not extend more and hope to give some key findings for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cynthia, for this very precise summary of the main conclusion and challenges that the Mediterranean and Africa are facing because of the climate change. And I think it is really currently extremely pressing to have an agreement, particularly that involves the private sector and the financial sector specifically, to move into the green transition, to fund the sustainable transition. Obviously, there are many constraints in this process because our production system, economic systems, are still based on polluting elements and fossil fuel. So it takes many years, really decades and even more, to change or to transform the production and the economic systems. And of course, the transition costs are not, we need to think about them as well. I mean, these are costs which will have to be dealt with, and I'm not sure the public sector or the governments enough they could deal with it. But thank you very much for this, and this really gives us the tempo for the discussion today. Now let me introduce Professor Chukwumerije Okereke, who is the director of the Center for Climate Change and Development at Alex Ekweme Federal University, Fudo alike, and visiting professor at the University of Universities of Readings and Oxford in the UK. Chuck, he's globally recognized leading scholar on global climate governance and international development with expertise in climate justice, national green growth transition in Africa, climate adaptation, business climate strategies. I read with a lot of interest, Chuck, the piece that you published on how to finance climate change at the eve of the COP26, and I'm sure you can tell us more about your contribution to the COP26 as well during this webinar. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and the screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Professor Rim. It is a pleasure and honor to have been invited to join you to discuss what I think is a very, very topical issue with regards to African development. I think that the issue of green transition, and especially how that can or is financed in Africa, is one of the most challenging and topical issues that will define the trajectory of African development in decades to come. As you have already identified, there are two key risks facing Africa with respect to climate change. The first is the physical risks, which has to do with the impact of climate change on our natural and human system. And Cynthia has actually identified some of the most potent ones. Africa is the most vulnerable to climate change. According to some reports done by DFID in Nigeria, it is projected that Africa perhaps will be losing between 100 billion to climate change by 2020 and up to 460 billion by 2050. And this is similar to what is projected to happen in other African countries. And the impact, as Professor you were highlighting in your opening speech, ranges from loss of agricultural yield as a result of precipitation and drought. In Nigeria, for example, projections show that some staple crops will suffer up to 35 to 50% loss in yield by 2050. Clearly, this will exacerbate the issue of poverty and hunger and food insecurity. Now, we also know that flooding has been increasing in both frequency and intensity in and around Africa. Again, to use Nigeria as an example, in 2012, according to government's own calculation, flooding events cost the country up to 16 billion US dollars, direct and indirect costs. But also, Nigeria has been experiencing intense flooding events since 2012, accurately calculated. Many African countries are coastal countries. Nigeria, for example, has several kilometers around the coast. Sea level rise is already affecting many cities in Africa. I think the projection shows that up to 500 million people will be relocated by 2050 in Lagos, and many more across Africa. Some cities like Banjul, Lagos, Dar es Salaam may actually be completely lost at a sea level rise of more than 0.1 meters. But also there is the transition risks that Professor you have begun to mention in your last comment. And these transition risks range from stranded asset to loss of livelihood and jobs as nations move away from oil to the green technology. And this is a serious challenge for a lot of African countries that are very fossil fuel dependent. Nigeria, for example, has 86% of its resources, foreign exchange earning tied to oil, and there is no clear transition in sight despite the announcements that net zero commitments that have been made recently. So we are dealing with a huge issue with respect to climate change. And we know that this risk has now been exacerbated by the impact of COVID. Although Africa did not lose as many people as was originally projected, but the economic and social impact of COVID is devastating and potentially long-lasting. Africa was growing roughly about 5% GDP per annum before COVID, and now it is projected that many of African countries will have to suffer recession in years to come, even though we are very thankful that the rebound seems to be faster than has been predicted. But COVID has also exposed deep fissures in our social fabric with huge inequality in terms of the impact of COVID, but also of climate change. So the aspect of social costs of recovery and impact is also something that we need to be looking at. Now, if we begin to ask the question, how do we finance this recovery? I would like to frame my answer in terms of 4 key things. Number 1 is plan. Number 2 is institution. Number 3 is instruments. And number 4 is standard. Let me take those in turn very quickly. First, in terms of planning, one of the critical elements for scaling up finance for green recovery has to be plans and strategies. Obviously, countries that devote time to have credible, robust plan will do far better and currently are doing far better than those that are not paying enough attention to plans and strategy. In fact, I can predict that in future, the rate of loans, interest to loans will be tied to how credible African NDCs are. This was already part of what we discussed yesterday in COP26 here in Glasgow with the president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the World Bank chief, and many other top financial experts in the room. This plan have to be data-driven and have to focus on where is the win-wins, what are the big wins, and what are the low-hanging fruits. I did an analysis of adaptation in African NDCs, covering 48 African NDCs for the African Development Bank. And what we found was that there is a huge variation in the quality of the plans that Africans are putting forward, and that over 56% of those adaptation asks were not properly costed. This means that those partners who are willing to invest in helping Africa to gain resilience to climate change find it difficult to really articulate precisely what it is that we are asking them to invest in. And so the key issue facing Africa that will go a long way in determining the quality of finance for green transition and the quantity will be how credible is the plan. Plans are necessary to ensure that there is no or that overlap or even conflict in terms of the investment options. And a key part of these plans have to be sectoral plans, but also emission reduction pathways. Across Africa, you have still very, very few countries that are investing in data-driven emission reduction pathways, scenarios that will give investors some kind of confidence in what to invest on and the kind of returns that they can expect in making such investments. The second thing is institution. It is important to build financial institutions and structures that will attract big investments in Africa. And here, a critical aspect of the institutions will be national finance platforms that will be able to leverage co-financing from private public financing structures and instruments, dedicated funding ports to finance green transition, but also critically institutional and legal frameworks. Professor has just mentioned, I think, 2 African countries that are pioneering. I know that I think Morocco recently have a new Green Growth Commission or agency. These kind of agencies and institutions will be critical in helping to develop the plans that I spoke about in my initial point, to elaborate those sectoral plans, to cost those sectoral plans. Very, very critical. We have many African countries that have revised their NDCs, and some of them have indicated the costs of those NDCs. Nigeria, 177 billion, for example, with 122 billion projected to go into electrification. However, we see when we look at this NDC that is quite flaky with respect to sectoral plans. So institutions like what we have now in Morocco, in terms of the Green Growth Commission or agency, can devote a lot of emphasis in elaborating detailed and well-costed sectoral plans that will provide confidence for investors as we try to move money into green transition in Africa. Legal frameworks. I was heavily involved in drafting a new law for Nigeria, which has been passed by the 2 houses of parliament in Nigeria, and now waiting assent on the part of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Muhammad Buhari. Should that law be signed, should that bill be signed into law, it provides a dedicated fund that will help to de-risk green investment in Nigeria, and therefore leverage private sector and money from MDBs. The third one is instruments. If we have credible plan, and then we have the right financial institutions and structures, especially national financial platforms, a dedicated funding port, legal and institutional frameworks, then we have to then make sure that we have the right instruments. And here, some of the front-running instruments could be green bonds. Nigeria has already floated 2 green bonds, one that raised about $10 billion and the other that raised about 15 billion US dollar. Sovereign risk bond is critical. Pension, many African countries have very huge pension pots. We need to now be looking at how we can unlock these pension assets and make sure that we move them to the green area. Then, as Professor Ryan was saying, we need also to be looking at private, public-private partnerships. And a key aspect is also green budgets. A lot of our budgets are not really trackable in terms of how green they are, and to be able to understand the projects that are going to be attracting attention in this way. Blended finance, a clean energy auction, and unlocking trillions from the private sector, but also from multilateral development bank is of great importance. But what I'm hearing from financial experts in COP is that a major limitation is risk. And so that what can happen is that sovereign money or public money can be used significantly to de-risk investors, so that more money from private sectors can flow. And then the final one is about standards. One of these biggest challenges in terms of moving money to green projects is still about the lack of standards of what constitutes an ESG and how to measure and report. And so the market still is not able to really weigh the returns that one can expect in investing in green assets. And so we need to be moving to a situation where we can have greater transparency, but also much more clearer standard in terms of what is a green asset so that the market can price those effectively. And the key aspect of this will have to be how to standardize our ESG measurements and disclosure. I think that a critical aspect has to be also debt relief. Many African countries are now much more into debt as a result of COVID, but also climate change. We know that rich countries were able to spend roughly $10 trillion, most of which were assessed on the basis of very low interest loans. Africa as a whole and the MENA regions are not able to access money at a comparatively low interest. And so one key option we have to explore has to be debt relief. But now what they're telling me, most of them, my friends here at COP, is that Africa and the entire MENA region have to be much more specific and be in terms of where the money will be channeled to, but will have to accept greater scrutiny in terms of transparency and accountability in the expenditure of those money. So I hope that sets a context. But I think in closing, I wanted to mention one key point that was mentioned yesterday in one of the major side events, and which is that you can talk all you like about the instruments, about the institutions, about this plan, but that in the absence of a stable macroeconomic environment, where if there's threats of coup, we just had 2 coups in Mali, for example, we have huge insecurity issues in Nigeria. If the macroeconomic environment is not stable, then you can forget this promise of attracting several hundreds of billions to Africa and the MENA regions to power our transition. So I leave it there. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this very comprehensive overview. I cannot agree more with you. I think this is really giving the overall approach of what should be done. Now, the problem is who is willing to do it, how they will do it. You need the political willingness as well. You need to have a collective approach at a national level and also at a global level to push into this transition as much as possible. But also, and this is extremely important, is to link to the debate of debt relief. And you mentioned rightly the transparency. I think we at EMEA, we have been pushing for debt transparency since a couple of years already, and we even developed a registry for debt transparency for low and middle income countries to show where the funds have been allocated to and where they should be allocated to, particularly if we want to go into this green transition and see where those funds are. And beyond this, you mentioned the standards, absolutely, ESG. And beyond ESG, I think the financial sector nowadays needs also to contribute. And this is a new method. For example, in Europe, they have been subjected to what we call the green asset ratio. They need to reach a minimum green asset ratio. But then, of course, this puts pressure as well on the transition risk, as you also mentioned previously. So there are some trade-offs that must be taken into account, and they must be first identified to be taken into account and dealt with going forward. But thank you very much for this very enlightening comment and contributions. I would like to move without further ado to the next panelists. I'm very happy to have again with us Kwame Sarpong Barnieh, who is a partner at KPMG Ghana. I think you heard already about the ESG and the standard, and I think the role of accounting and the role of auditing is very essential to push further the green transition. So Kwame is, leading the practice on internal audit, risk and compliance. He has several years of experience, more than now 18 years of experience working across different dimensions of the internal audit, risk assessment, management, governance, compliance, review. This is essential. And I think we need to move now sustainably, to where to this, green dimensions and ESG. So please, Kwame, you can share with us your view about this. How do you see all of this introduced, in fact, from a company point of view, from banks' point of view, how to really move into sustainable transitions and have for example, the financial sector, and also the private sector as a lever for this. And then we need to start somewhere. Of course, the public sector, they can do, but again, they have their own pressures. And as you heard from Professor Schock, I think the COVID-19 doesn't let them to really have the appropriate fiscal space to do what they want to do. So they are really stranded. I would say they're practically stranded in this situation between the green transition and, post-recovery situation and what happened in the COVID. Please, Kwame, the screen is yours.
Doctor, yes, thank you very much. I think I'm so excited to listen to all of you speak, and it kind of boils down to everything that we at KPMG have been doing and doing. I mean, I'm happy to say that KPMG Global is looking to invest $1.5 million to promote, $1.5 billion to promote ESG in the next 3 years. And some of the reasons are very clear, and I think most of them have been mentioned by you, but I just want to put a bit of a business twist to it, as Doctor had alluded to. I mean, if you look at the top 5 risks, I mean, globally now, ESG is like topical, right? If you look at the likelihood of issues, extreme weather conditions is there, human environment change, infectious disease. So this tells you that ESG is something that we must pay attention to. That's why a firm like KPMG is looking at investing so much in the next 3 years. One key pillar, which is so important, is that investors are also demanding for companies to be more responsible, because you can make money, but the question is, how do you make that money? Are you intentional about the environmental impact, the social impact, and also the whole governance of the activities that you go through? I think it's also clear that costs of mitigating the effects of climate change is currently lower than the cost of ignoring them. We can't ignore this. So as a business, as individuals, so my appeal, so somebody made a point, I think the doctor, that who is to do this, right? So my appeal to individuals and businesses is that we can do business, right? But we can do it through the ESG lens, and it's more sustainable, it's more profitable if you look at it holistically. Now, just to show you a bit of a performance, I mean, it's clear that volatility around ESG compliance entities are much lower. And in the long term, their performance much better. So again, I don't want to make this so much complicated, but the point I'm making is that if you're an entity that has a holistic view on applying ESG consistently in your strategy, you end up attracting more investors, you end up becoming a better company for society, and therefore is the way to go. Now, just to show you some regional activities, just to kind of tell you, I mean, I really like what Prof was talking about Nigeria, and if you listen to it, it is all true, but the reality is that where's the political will? How are we going to do this? How are we going to make sure that we get this thing done? So, I mean, IFC, AFDB, they've been doing a lot. If you look at the points I'm making here, IFC is supporting several countries across Africa in this whole green finance. But the question is, where's that holistic plan and where's that political will to accept it, to ensure that this really gets bought in, right? IFC invests 200 million in Standard Bank in South Africa for green bonds. It's clear, it's an activity that's towards green. Again, how is this being accepted? Who's driving it? What are the interdependencies across? IFC has partnered with SEC, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission in Ghana, to develop a roadmap to help the green bond market. Very, very good for the country like Ghana, right? AFDB now pledges to double its investment between 2022 to 2025. That's fantastic news. So, I mean, all these shows the need for action and some sort of action that has already been taken. And the question is, how do we really grab these opportunities and make it holistic to support the overall agenda? If you look at Ghana specifically, there's some interesting activities going on. I was actually part of the leadership team that ran the first country financing roadmap for the SDG initiatives. Basically, is to look at how the country is going to finance these SDGs, because everything that we're talking about here requires financing. We talk about political will. Political will is about people who have the authority putting their support behind it and providing the needed support. So this financing roadmap was really revealing. It really showed the country where we are. I mean, it really demonstrated that we needed to do a lot. Ghana has become a member of the UN's page, clearly in the direction of taking the step to bring in the right policies to drive sustainability. The bond market for green is ripe. I think the country is really looking at issuing some green bonds. There's a lot of work ongoing in that area as well. Now, the central bank has really issued the directive that is supposed to have banks in Ghana follow sustainable banking principles. Again, this is really good because it promotes a lot of what ESG is about, especially around governance. Because in Ghana, for instance, in 2017, we had about 8 or so banks fail. It was really bad, and if you look to the core of it, most of it was governance-related issues, right? And these are things that we must really look at. I think I mentioned the Ghana Stock Exchange, or the also really moving strong, I mean, with regards to this whole ESG agenda. Now, this is where, I mean, I want to talk about what is impeding this direction, or what is impeding this challenge. I think it's clear that organizations or our technical training in businesses don't allow us to really calculate risk or do the risk-rated return on assets, right? So if you look at the cost of doing business and not considering ESG, it outweighs you as an entity in being proactive and being direct about that. So that level of training that we require across our boardrooms, executive level, is something that we need to really pay attention to, because eventually that direction of ESG is more profitable for us. The collaboration is Nigeria's doing this, Sierra Leone doing this. I mean, the doctor made a point earlier as data-driven activities. How do we support what we do with data? How much data do we have? I always say in Africa, we are data rich, but insight poor. We have data, but we don't do anything with it, right? The regulatory landscape is really low because even the regulators don't really have an understanding. That's why I'm also excited about Bank of Ghana adopting that sustainability principles for banks, because as a regulator, you need to really drive what your entities or individuals do. And here in Africa, that's a challenge that we have. So again, way forward, I think it's really important that we have this commitment from key stakeholders, especially businesses, because the business environment drives every economy. Banks and business drive the economy. So when we have businesses that adopt this ESG strategy or process, it makes things better. Now, adopting a systematic approach will require the financial sector through governments, and it's really interesting that a lot of meetings are going on with the COP26 and all that to really shape this, and hopefully there will be some strong touch points that will really be implementable around this whole process. And I think if all banks in different jurisdictions are put together to follow this agenda, where they provide proper financing or better financing for ESG compliant entities. I think it would definitely, so in a nutshell, we need this commitment from the business leaders, individuals as well. We need to retrain our people. We need a systematic approach across Africa, across regulators to ensure that there's consistency. It's like an accounting standard. Accounting standards are international. IFRS is international. We need something like this for ESG related activities to ensure that we all play to the same playbook and we save ourselves. Thank you all for listening to me, and I'll pass it back on to Dr.
Thank you very much, Kwame, for this overview. I think the role, as you mentioned, the role of the ESG and how to mainstream it in the private sector, and also to have a clear strategy on how to ensure that all the companies really abide to it, and also it is part of the disclosure process, and also eventually even accounting. And I think now there is a whole debate to have a specifically linked accounting standard for sustainability, and I think this is the way forward. And hopefully there will be an agreement in the COP26 on this specific issue. I mean, I'm acting as the chair of the advisory board of the European Banking Authority, and yesterday we published our statement for the COP26, and really pushing for not only the banking sector at EU level, but also trying really to move beyond all this debate about transition risk, and especially in the banking sector, and try really to have the banking industry accelerating the transition and abiding to the green asset ratio, and eventually even accepting to have prudential rules that have to be applied to them for credit risk, which is not clean, in fact. So this is, of course, it's being pushed back by the banking industry, because I don't want to see their capital ratios increasing. But in the long run, there should be some firm matrix from a regulatory standpoint, and you mentioned the role of the central banks and the regulatory authorities to, in fact, move quicker into the transition. But at the same time, we need to be a bit pragmatic and consider that there is a transition risk, and this transition risk needs to be identified, quantified, and then also moved fast into greening. So then there is no chance for the financial industry to step back on that. So of course, the production and economic systems will have to move into greener. So thank you very much, Kwame, for this commitment, also from a KPMG point of view, and your commitment as an organization to accelerate this transition. I would like to move to the next panelist. I'm very happy to introduce Martin Lukac. Martin, he's a professor of ecosystem science at the University of Reading as well. And he is holding a visiting position at the University of Life Science in Prague. He has more than 20 years of experience in research in plant physiology and ecology, genetic and functional diversity and climate change. His main area of expertise is in the study of terrestrial ecosystem productivity, carbon cycling and ecosystems storage, climate change mitigation and adaptation, with the specific focus on forestry and agroforestry. Martin has published a number of many articles, more than 80 articles in peer-reviewed journals, books and chapters and all of this. So I'm extremely happy to have Martin with us today. We also are developing some joint projects on agroforestry and how agroforestry could also tackle the climate change. Please, Martin, the floor is yours, and you can tell us what would be the role of innovation research really to move into the transition, and how we could also create this collaborative approach with the private sector, with the public sector, and with the academia at the same time to accelerate this transition in I would say, in a positive way, and you know, holding on the opportunities. Please.
Thank you, Rim. It's good to see a strong reading presence on the panel here. That's great. Yes, I have probably published more papers than is healthy, because then people have to read them. And when it's too many, it's too many. But I'll stick to the topic. I'll take you to a completely different world, being an ecologist, essentially, and a forester. I guess one of the place where I should start is in Europe, and then I'll move to Africa. The reason for that is that in Europe we have enacted land use change over the past maybe 2,000 years, and we ended up with a severely deforested landscape. So one of the challenges we have is that we have removed the trees from the landscape, and we have to try and figure out a way how to fit them back while still producing food from the landscape. Now, in Africa, of course, this transition is happening right now. The challenge and the scary bit is that this is becoming critical because there isn't a spare green continent somewhere else, as back in the day when Europe was doing the same thing. So we have to actually enact this green transition at a very good pace in order to avoid ecosystem breakdown on a global scale. And at the same time, specifically looking at Africa, the challenge is, or the challenge will be, feeding 2 billion extra humans. If you look at the UN predictions for the population rise on the planet, in about 30 years' time, in 2050, there will be about 2 billion more people on the planet. And out of these, perhaps 2 billion will be in Africa. So the continent where we will most likely see the biggest increase in the population size is in Africa, and we need to feed these people. There is no other way around it. So the challenge is to generate a substantial amount of extra food, and at the same time to preserve the functionality of natural environment and ecosystems. And this is where agroforestry comes in, as Rim has just mentioned. The advantage of these systems is that we can produce food, we can produce energy, and we can produce a wide range of ecosystem services from the same piece of land. So as they say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. So what I'll do, I'll just share a couple of examples with you. This is just for illustration, just so that you can perhaps easier imagine what I am talking about. So the agroforestry is defined as a purposeful combination of agriculture and trees. So we mix them up on purpose. There are two main versions of it. One is silvo arable, which is on my slide here, and the other one is silvo pasture. The first one is a combination of crops and trees. I'll show you some European examples, but this system is far more widespread in Africa, as it happens already. So we are trying to knock at an open door, by and large. So as you can see on my image here, there is a plot of land which is plowed and planted with a crop, and this is surrounded typically by rows of trees. In Europe, it's done in a way to facilitate easy integration of machinery and modern agriculture in between the trees. So the advantage of these systems is that the trees provide a microclimate for the crop. And as I've already mentioned, you can combine trees with crops, and the other main group is silvopasture, where you can combine trees with animals. So just a couple of examples. These are trees with cattle, which is grazing underneath the tree canopy. This is a European example with sheep, and perhaps a little less known final example here. This is silvo poultry. This is where we can keep chickens, which are covered by the trees. These systems are a lot better for the animals because the environment they are in is very close to the natural environment where these species have evolved. Okay, so there is a clear benefit for the agricultural side, and at the same time, we have trees in the system. And as soon as you plant a tree, and the tree starts growing, this means carbon accumulation and this means carbon sequestration, both in the tree and in the soil underneath the tree. Okay, so these systems are superbly flexible, and final slide I'll show you today. They can be combined in a way that you can switch between the two in the same piece of land. So you can imagine a rotation where for maybe 3-4 years, you use the bits between the trees for arable agriculture, and then you switch to pasture. You cover it with grazing, with a forage. You keep animals on the land for a bit, and then you switch back to arable. Okay, so this is what it means. This is what agroforestry actually is. So to kind of summarize and to show you where do we want to go with this, as I've already mentioned, you can produce food. That's the main attraction. You can produce energy in terms of bioenergy. You can sequester carbon in these systems. They protect and develop the soil, which in many regions in Africa, the fight against desertification is a very strong concern right now. So if I were to just briefly outline where we can see the research challenges and where we can see the collaboration taking place. Incidentally, as it happens, these systems work better the closer to the equator you get. The reason for that is the light intensity. The stronger the sunlight, the more layers in these systems you can run in the same piece of land, and the more productive they will be. So in terms of research, these are traditional systems. They are already practiced in many versions in different regions in Africa. What we can contribute, or what we should focus on these days, is try and integrate modern agriculture and more productive agriculture with the traditional agroforestry systems. What we can focus on is carbon sequestration in these systems. This is both for perhaps for generating carbon credits and carbon finance, but also for mitigating climate change and for improving the productivity and the functionality of these systems. As a rule of thumb, the more carbon is in the soil, the better the soil will work for the crops. And lastly, and this is becoming important in Africa also, it's biodiversity and biodiversity conservation. So many species require some sort of tree cover in the landscape in order for them to migrate. If we create landscapes which are entirely devoid of trees and deforested, this is no longer possible. So if we still want to produce food from land, we should also focus on preserving the landscape type and the connectivity between different habitats within that landscape. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to plant trees in some meaningful systems. So carbon finance and increasingly so biodiversity finance. This is where we can perhaps go. So that was my short introduction to agroforestry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. This is very interesting because what we would probably try to do in there is to link two systems and eventually solve a problem, which is specifically the food security, without creating further pollution and even at the same time sequestering carbon. And this is really like solving two problems with one shot.
Yes, indeed.
And I think this is what science is providing us, and then it should be, that's why I think collaboration between the private sector, the public sector, and academia is extremely important to move the transition in a more efficient and resilient manner. So yes, really upscale solutions that are efficient and resilient to in fact, accelerate. And these are the type of solution that we want for the future. And at the same time, of course, this means that we need to change the perception about the forests, the use of the forests, and at the same time, have this urge to plant more trees in even spaces where there are no trees. And I think this is something that is happening, in Africa, but I don't know to what extent it is really becoming a norm, a mainstream or not. So
one of the challenges in speaking about planting trees, one of the challenges is not as much planting the trees these days. There are some well-funded programs that are aiming to do that. What I think we should aim for is to engage the people that live and work next to these new forests, to make sure that they understand why did this planting take place and how is this useful for them. Because if we don't do that, the newly planted trees do have the tendency to disappear very quickly.
Mm. Yes, absolutely. The role of engagement is essential. And I think with Cynthia, we are trying to develop methods for engagement and collaborations. And this is essential as well to ensure that whatever new idea, which is a pilot, could be mainstreamed, capitalized on, and enhanced within the community and within the country or within the region. So I think this is very essential. Thank you very much for this. I would like to move straight forward to the discussion, and I'm very happy to introduce with us today Dr. Meggan Spires, who is the Director of Climate Change Energy Resilience of ICLEI Africa. So it's a network. ICLEI Africa is a network of more than 300 plus network cities in over 26 African countries. And then Meggan has managed a team of multi-year, multi-country programs and projects in the field of energy access, climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation. And then mainly it involves also her work on capacity building. I think also Kwame mentioned the role of training and education capacity building. I think this is essential. And also policy development, implementation, and really on how to finance the climate aspects into the city scale. So Meggan, I think thank you for being with us today. I know that you had some issues with the internet. I hope these are solved. I don't see you yet on the screen. Yes, now yes, Meggan, that's great. So thank you for being with us. I think you heard our panelists today and the different ideas that they propose. So what is your view about all of this, and how do you see the green transition accelerated, and with which money and how, with which pilots, with which policies of upscaling, transition planning? So please.
Thanks so much, Roman, and thank you very much for having me here this afternoon. Yes, I thought it would be useful to pick up on some of the points I heard from the speakers. Maybe let me first speak to some of the points that Kwame was raising in terms of public-private partnership standards and transition risk. These are some of the terms that I heard raised. And let me speak particularly from the city or local government perspective. Obviously, being a city network and recognizing the importance of local action, it's long been our mantra that we need to ensure for the green transition to occur adequately, that finance flows to cities. And as has been spoken about in terms of some of the challenges around public and private partnerships, some of the challenges around standards and transition risks, we face those same challenges at the city scale. I think there's wide acceptance now that for climate change to be tackled, for COVID-19 or health pandemics to be responded to, local action is key. But the real stumbling block currently is that it's very difficult for finance to flow directly to cities to be able to tackle these two issues. And many of it relates to the same issues around standards. How can we enable public-private partnerships to be more effective, etc. And we've seen that just as I've been following the COP26 discussions, that this has been the focus really of COP26 has all been about finance. And from our perspective, it's about how can that finance flow down to the city scale. Then just picking up on some of the really important points that Martin was making, it was also music to my ears because we've also long been saying that we need to work with climate change and nature in collaboration. And nature has a huge amount that it can offer in terms of climate change response. And so these ideas of twinning, providing food, with dealing with climate change, as well as tackling biodiversity loss, makes so much sense. You know, we need integrated responses. And all of this links very much to other points being made around collaboration between different stakeholders, the importance of the research community. And there are some wonderful examples on the African continent that we are involved in that are relating to reforestation in communities. And the advantage of reforestation is that it has climate change benefits, that it brings biodiversity back and the ecosystem services along with it. And there's collaboration between community members. And I think it's essential that we do this all within the context of inequality and in the context in which we don't want to be implementing solutions in response to climate change or COVID-19 that is widening the gap between the rich and the poor. Particularly on the African continent, inequality is one of our most fundamental challenges. And if we're not tackling that in all of the work that we do, we really do risk major challenges for the poorest and the most vulnerable to climate change. So those are some of my reflections from the inputs. I found them really, really interesting. And as said, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Meggan, for a very precise comment. And then we'll go back later on to the discussion altogether. I would like to also give the floor to my colleague, Hana Lakhdar Ghazal, who is the Director General of Positive Agenda Advisory. Hana is currently assumed the directorship of the institution. Let me remind that Positive Agenda is an advocacy, business development, and executive strategy firm based in Morocco, which aims to help its clients to develop their growth strategy, and they started already producing very interesting work on the climate change aspects and environmental aspects. So please, Hana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Reem. Hi to everyone. Thank you for welcoming me to this event. Maybe I can start by sharing a few ideas. Well, the discussion and exchanges were very interesting, and some of the ideas that we mentioned in the report we worked on at Positive Agenda might be accurate to mention regarding that the discussion. So the first thing is basically it's true that like the COVID-19 crisis, the pandemic hit very hard on economies, and it's really an extreme scenario that we're currently living. So that's very true. At the same time, in Morocco, at least, we are living something very, very unique, since we had a new elected government, as you know, on the beginning of October, and this very new government is actively looking towards climate change and the energetic transition, and really all the aspects that you were recently I heard from the discussion. So maybe just to say that maybe there is an opportunity. We'll see how it goes, of course, but maybe there's an opportunity due to that pandemic to see how to reshape a bit the policy making aspect, because that's one thing that I wanted to focus on. When Cynthia mentioned the different insights from the report, the ICC report, one of them was governance. And really, we are governance at the core, at the center of the whole architecture of this recovery framework, if I might say. So the first thing is really, it might be an opportunity to reshape a bit how we tackle finance, how we use finance, how we channel it, how we target vulnerable populations, how we use that money, and how we evaluate at the end the use of that money. So that's a point I think might be interesting to look upon. The second thing is actually I think one of the the thing that maybe drag a bit climate finance to be a real opportunity for recovery is the drivers of the current economy and the world economy are very far from the drivers of climate investment, right? So as you mentioned, for instance, Professor Lukac, as you mentioned, the ideas and the experiment that you just shown are really amazing, and that would be something we would invest in as a government. Then how to pitch that to policymakers, how to make them invest in that kind of projects, and how to make sure that those projects are embedded within all strategies and public strategies. That's a real issue. I think we will really, as the governments, will need to look into that very carefully. So that connection, actually, climate finance needs to be at the service of a vision of policy making, and not the opposite. So that's something that a change of paradigm that we need to look into. And maybe just two other ideas I wanted to share, if you allow me. The first one is that we will definitely need a multiple level engagement at the human level, actually. So we do have, as Mrs. Spires said, we do have a collective consciousness with cities and with that kind of networks, but we do have maybe, for the first one we have is the policymakers engagement. We really need to make sure that they understand the need for climate change and understand the use of climate finance, because in the end, even if we engage with private and public partnership, the framework is set by policymakers. So that's something very important to keep in mind. We will have to design that framework, and we will have to make sure that policymakers are aware of what it takes. It takes a lot of management. It takes a lot of self-commitment at the policymakers level. The second one is the firm level. And here again, we are talking about CEOs, about managers. They also need to understand how climate finance can help them on a daily basis to reach their P&L, to reach their goals, and to reach their vision as a firm. There's also another level, which is the individual level. You and I, we are involved in that kind of circular economy. So we will also need to have a role in that design and in that growth recovery scheme. So the last thing I wanted to share is that there's a bridge that we might need to maybe work on is between research and policy making. And that's the last thing I want to share, because there's a huge gap between research and policy making. And since it is not available for policymakers to understand, again, how they can channel that kind of finance climate, say funds or opportunities, they won't necessarily understand how to use that properly and how to make the most of it, and how to make it available for cities or NGOs or multiple stakeholders. So that's about the governance aspect. That's something I wanted to state. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Hana, for this very important remarks on the discussion today. I would like to get Ghazal on the screen for the last part of this discussion. We still have around 15 to 20 minutes. In the meanwhile, we lost Professor Shock. He was called by his minister in the COP26, so he's on action now. But I think this discussion is very important because it gives us a clear idea that, of course, for Africa and the Mediterranean countries, we still need to do a lot. and there is a kind of probably a need for much more awareness on the challenges that the continent and the Mediterranean region are facing to tackle the climate change challenges and really adapt as fast as possible. Of course, we all provide, and many are providing very interesting solutions for it. But for me, the most difficult trade-off nowadays, and this has been emphasized by Professor Shaw, is these countries are suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic, so they increase their indebtedness level, so they have less what they call fiscal space to green their economy. And at the same time, the global setting is moving us in the green transition, and I think this is important. But at the same time, we take the case of Nigeria. They are still basing their revenue system on fossil fuels. So how do you see all of this? How do you see those trade-offs? Where can we start, and how can we really move from countries like, for example, not only Nigeria, but also the case of Algeria, case of also Libya? They're all of them basing their revenues on fossil fuel, and even in terms of the gas. So even the gas now is not necessarily treated as a clean source. So how do you see this? How can we really accelerate these markets and change the production systems and move the transition to green economy forward? I would like to start from probably Kwame. Kwame, do you have anything to say about this?
Sure, thank you. So again, I think the reality is that it's not a simple issue, but it's an issue that is important to tackle. And therefore, I think I alluded to it earlier that we need a strategic sort of collaboration to ensure that there's a bit of standardization and consistency across the different jurisdictions. This, in effect, will take care of the peculiar challenges that will be, let's say, identified by a particular country and therefore need to resolve. So for me, the COP26 is a good start. I think the World Bank, IFC, some of these international players have come together to really shape up one agenda. That's one. Two, I think governments, through their regulators, must also shape an agenda where it doesn't matter what industry you play in, there's some level of consistency. And that's why, as I said, KPMG, for instance, this whole ESG agenda, what we want to do is we want to make it part of our service that we offer. So if we are doing an audit, we will look at the opportunities to enhance the organization through the audit lens. Within the risk of work, we look at the opportunities to enhance it. So at the end of the day, what happens is that the entity becomes ESG sensitive and aware. So those are some drive that international collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwame. Martin, how do you see, for example, a solution like what we propose mainstreamed, and then if it is mainstreamed, how could the financial community pour money into it so then it is upscaled?
Yes, I was thinking about the earlier question, how to make this faster. And I think the key in here, these are... We shouldn't try and reinvent the wheel. These systems are very old and they are in practice in many places. So as far as I can see, the challenge is knowledge transfer between different communities, education in terms of benefits and co-benefits one can get from diverse systems. So I think what we should aim in Africa is not to repeat the mistake we have made in Europe, where we focused on single species systems to produce food, The key is in diversity. It has many different benefits. One of the most important ones is resilience, talking about climate change. So the more diverse my system is, the more likely it is to be resilient against changes in the environment. So knowledge transfer, education about the benefits, and now about just touching upon the mechanism, how the financial system could kickstart it is, I suspect what needs to happen is development of new financial instruments. So I guess we have these huge promises of billions and billions of dollars, and we probably have some big donors who are willing to give it a lot of money. But how do we construct the pipeline between these big money pots and a smallholder in Uganda, for example? How do we make sure that the people that actually need the carbon payments or the biodiversity payments receive the money and understand the connection between the way they manage the land and these money streams? I think that is the challenge right now.
Thank you, Martin. Meggan, what do you think about this, since you are managing a large network of cities? So how do you see this transition accelerated?
Yeah, I think there is sometimes a sense of feeling very overwhelmed for African city stakeholders because these challenges that are being faced are so unprecedented. 10, 20 years ago, we couldn't have imagined the climate change impacts that are being felt. We couldn't have imagined the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think there is a pushback now to say, and I think it's similar to what the other panelists have been alluding to, that we need to look to simple solutions that do offer where they can win-win-wins. And I'm thinking of an example of work we're doing, for instance, in Rwanda, where we are assisting the health department to rejuvenate their healthcare centres, so to have renewable energy installed and water tanks installed. Very simple technologies, but they offer that win-win-win because it means those healthcare centres can operate if there's an electricity outage. It means those healthcare centres can operate if there's a water outage. It means that the fridges can run for longer, that vaccines can be kept cool, and obviously there are greenhouse gas emissions reductions in the renewable energy interventions that we are installing. And so something like that is one tangible, very small, basic intervention shows what is possible, both as a response to climate change, a response to inequality, and a response to COVID-19. The key thing now is to try and scale this. And some of the work we're doing is to then bring that into the policy interventions at a national government level so that it becomes the norm. And that's how healthcare centres are built, for instance, in Rwanda. I would agree that there's a need, of course, to mobilize transformative finance, but there are also many solutions that can be done on balance sheet within municipalities and cities with their existing finance. Often it comes through grants from national government, some is generated themselves. And this is about having the right lens with which to do our work. But of course, for the transformative solutions that are necessary, the calls that pop up here for significant funding to flow, and we're seeing some really good responses. Just yesterday, there was an announcement, I'm sure many on the webinar heard, that South Africa is going to be receiving significant, in the billions of US dollars investment from global north countries to help it move away from a coal-based electricity system. So we are seeing these positive announcements from COP. We hope that the commitments will be kept. But as said, I think it's also important for us to look for on-balance sheet with existing resources solutions as well. I don't think there's any one solution, both are needed.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. We need all types of solutions, in fact, to accelerate this transition. I look at Cynthia. Would you like to add anything on this point?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, I was precisely thinking what Meggan was highlighting, and link also what Hana pointed out about the drive. Let's not forget the drive force that people can become as well. So, and also regarding my experience, when you see action and you see the example, you can have not only the recognition from people and citizens that, okay, it is possible, and then at the same time, the policymakers can also see that it's not so difficult to develop, to implement. So of course, there's I think that a challenging thing is this part of the engagement, precisely, but in an organized point of view. I mean, obviously, activism is good to make the shock, but it's more resilient to create and to construct, build together networks, sustainable networks that can ensure that all this effort that we are thinking and provided from the technology, from the research, but also from the policy point of view or finance, all this knowledge that really can touch in the ground. So for example, we have also a huge boom, if I can say, from the renewable energy communities, as you will know. In Europe, it's becoming something really a catalyst of driving change, as well as, for example, mobility and public space action. So what Meggan is highlighting, I also agree that when you have, even if it's a small example, but then you can see even in a domestic economic point of view, how this can be financed and can be feasible for a family, for an enterprise, for an entrepreneur or a company, and then the bigger ones. Then you can go to the bigger numbers. No? So for me, mainstreaming into society, but civil society, it's a challenging part.
Yes, I think you mentioned a very important element, which is trying to facilitate also those concepts to the people and to the companies, and they don't see it as a cost, because you see our economic system takes any constraint, environmental constraint as a cost. But then it should be an opportunity, it should be also seen as a way to create further revenues and really to have a different type of growth, which is cleaner growth. So it's not about cost anymore. Yes, probably you always have to invest anyway to be able to generate revenues. But then instead of generating revenues which do not take into account the clean aspect of it, so you develop cleaner growth and cleaner sources. And I think this takes time, but it's possible. I see, I don't know if Hana would like to add anything on this specific questions, then I can move to the questions from the chat. Hana?
Yes, thank you. Just one very small remark about what Cynthia just said. Because actually one thing that we need to bear in mind is that the needs are segmented, right? So there are some very big investments that the people, the individual will not be able to make. There are some investments that are very specific to communities, ones that are very specific to governments. I don't know, like public clean, public transport. That kind of segmentation is needed actually to understand better how to channel what kind of funds and what kind of resources can be used by that specific segment. It's like a marketing approach, I would say. So it's interesting to look into that kind of segmentation and to see precisely what Dr. Meggan Spires said about scaling up. Scaling up might be at some point. You can have a pilot project led by a community. Then when it comes to scaling up, you need to speak the language of the people or the institutions that are able to invest in that kind of project. So that's this shift needs a deeper analysis about what drives actually the investment, how to speak the language. Just an additional remark.
Okay, so I have another couple of more questions from the chat. So it's asking how do you see the rural areas resilience and how it relates to sustainable controlled urbanization. So practically, so how to attract, for example, new generations to rural areas, attract more investments for new jobs and technologies in this, for example, agriculture in rural areas. So this is the first question. And the second question is about the externalization dimension of the EU Green Deal. How will it bring, for example, more opportunities and more challenges for Africa, specifically in terms of its trade, finance relations with the European Union and other external actors? So these are two questions which probably I will ask first to Kwame on the rural aspects. So how we can develop or further the rural areas to limit the urbanization of the cities and all of this. So what do you think about this?
Okay, so it's a very interesting question, and it's a very good one if there's a pragmatic solution to that, right? Because yes, the trend of urbanization becoming something that is over for me. I think is really about understanding, right? There's a lot of education on individuals to really understand the total impact of this whole urbanization thing. And then there must be direct investment in rural areas where we provide whatever it is to attract people there. But at the end of the day, human beings get attracted to urban areas for specific reasons, right? So now as we expand and as things are happening, we need to be intentional as to how can we now with technology, a lot can happen. There's nothing like really practically rural area anymore because with internet, with a lot of infrastructure development, things can be shaped. So I think if we want to really push this agenda from the people side of it or migration side of it, we need to be intentional about making investments in some of these areas and put in intentional things that people want to do to help them, especially about work. I mean, companies must be incentivized to set up offices in certain areas, not everybody move to New York City, right? So that people who have the desire to live there, who have the desire to be closer to that area, there has to be certain important offices where people can travel to instead of everybody coming to the city for everything. And this again, the practical thing is that it requires an intentional strategy across key stakeholders to ensure that there's a timeline, an action plan, and this happens in, let's say, a period of about 3-5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwame. Martin, do you want to answer one of the second question?
I'm not really qualified because I don't have much experience in working in Africa. I was just thinking about this attractiveness of the rural area. I suspect the challenges in there are kind of common to just about anywhere on Earth, because what we see globally is movement of people into cities and depopulation of the countryside. And I suspect one of the answers could be diversification. So if you grow more crops or more diverse crops, and if you focus on growing trees between the crops, you can generate a higher diversity of products, which would tend to lead to a higher potential for diverse careers. This is universal, I think, more or less. So that could be one of the ways to try and stop the depopulation of the countryside and try and create more attractive jobs in there, higher paying jobs, clearly.
Yeah, thank you. Meggan?
Yeah, I think in Africa at least we know that it's a rapidly urbanizing population. When you look at the statistics, particularly in secondary or intermediate cities, it's significant on the continent. And so our work is more in terms of trying to ensure that those that move to urban areas are attracted there obviously by the offering of better services and access to jobs. Don't face a future in which they're living in informal settlements, slums, where they are even in some sense more vulnerable to climate change than what they were in rural areas because of the lack of social capital in informal settlements, the density with which people live, and the lack of services. So for us, it's really important to acknowledge that this urbanization is going to occur, but how can we ensure those that move to urban areas live a life that is fair, that is access to services, that is decent. That is really essential. And we've also really been trying to use cities as city regions. So the fact that a city doesn't just end where the boundaries of the city end, it draws on resources from rural areas and also affects how rural areas conduct themselves. And having this integrated approach means that we have a broader view of biodiversity and a broader view of how good, particularly food services are integrated. Interestingly, with COVID-19, we have seen in some contexts in Africa that as people have been able to work from home more, there has been some movement outside of the city because those opportunities are available to them. But as I say, that opportunity is generally available to your middle upper class. And for us, what the main focus should be on is dealing with and helping the poor to live lives that are decent and acceptable, and trying to ensure that informal settlements are service. So I think ways in which we can upgrade informal settlements that bring services, that bring access to nature, which helps with our mental states, helps our ability to cope in this ever-changing world are two important elements. But I think attempting to keep people in rural areas, in some senses, I think that ship has sailed.
That's very clear. Thank you. Hana, would you like to add anything on either questions?
Yes, thank you. I think that one needs like a very tailored approach, I guess, because that's very specific to each region. Since I think there's a need for like a double approach or a top-down approach first, because you first need to know the region, what are the potential developments for the region, and understand its assets and how the region can be enhanced on a national level. And then you need to understand the bottom-up, like to have the bottom-up approach, since actually what it means to develop a region is to attract investments, right? Or to develop, to create jobs, right? So in the end, you will need to understand why people move to the rural areas. What do they seek as it is mentioned in the discussion? Services, jobs, activities, entertainment, whatsoever, houses, affordable houses, etc. So this is the first thing. And second, for the company you attract that will create jobs, you will need to understand what drives it to settle in that region, to create that approach. I don't believe in public-driven development approaches for rural areas. I think it's more likely to be a combined approach with the private sector driving the creation of jobs in that kind of area. So it's important to understand who are what are the needs for that job creation, and what it takes to attract people and talents to that region, and to keep people from that region to settle in that region and find their well-being in that region. So I think it's a very tailored approach from one region to another.
I see the time passing, so I give finally the floor to Cynthia.
Okay, thank you, Rim. Well, in my opinion, I think that all territories have a role in the as a whole. So I totally agree that cities are the main economic motor. But what is true is that we have been, at least in most of the countries, we have centralized a huge amount of people in the same place. So I think that a bit of decentralization, it's not bad. That doesn't mean to not be conscious that the big cities are the big economic motors, for sure. but there are a lot of possibilities for medium-sized cities, and then to also be like new centralities on the territory. And here the rural areas can have a much better opportunity to develop, not only to ensure the new generation of farmers, of activities that we are losing. At least in Europe, we have a strong demand on this. So there are depopulated areas that somehow they need to be revitalized. So the revitalization and regeneration of in a sustainable path, in a green transition, I think that allows a very good symphony and harmony. Some synergies between the I think that it's like a symbiosis aspect that is involved in the different type of territories. And also linking the type of productivity and the potential productivity that they can have. Actually, if I can, I will invite you to follow us in the upcoming months. We're engaging our colleagues and our institutions that are part of the association and partners in EMEA to join to the Sustainable Transition Initiative that precisely wants to tackle this type of aspects related from a territorial resilience perspective. So how the combination and the synergy from different types of territories can allow us to make a more resilient path. Because answering to the question of the chat, that how we can control the urbanization. So I think that there's a lot of knowledge already and parameters that can help us to size cities and to size the resources requirements that they have and the capacity of the biosphere to provide these resources. So every territory can have potentially a growth rate. So this growth cannot be overloaded. So I think the ecological footprint gives us some references, but then we can also have from a local level this knowledge about how we can ensure or to go into a path of a more self-sufficient use and proper consumption and production of our settlements, I will say, even if it's a rural or a coastal or a city urban area.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cynthia. Our webinar is coming to an end. I would like to thank all the panelists, all the participants for this very interesting discussion. Obviously, we will continue our series of webinars on these specific topics on the sustainable transition. As Cynthia mentioned, we are now working on this transition forcefully to ensure that this collaborative thinking is put in place also within this region, Africa, Mediterranean, and Europe. Thank you again very much for your time. And then the report will be available on our website together with the recording. So please follow us on the Twitters and our social media in general. So thank you again. I don't know if we need to have a group picture or not. So if we will do a group picture, please switch on your cameras, whoever is connected.
I've already taken a picture of all speakers.
Okay.
So
perfect. So I thank you very much, and I see you next time. So please follow our next webinars whenever they are organized. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.